Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Men's Health Connected on the 8th of May, or Mate Day, as it's colloquially known in Australia. So what better day for us to have a focus on the value of mateship. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we meet from today. Please share what you want to share about that in the chat box if you want to. I'm joining you from the land of the Bunda Bunda, the Gureng, the Garang, and the Bailai people up here in central Queensland. So, for those who don't know, I'm Glenn Poole, CEO of the Australian Men's Health Forum. This is Men's Health Connected and part of a series we're running on the importance of social connection to men's health. We've been having and continue to have a number of really important conversations about this topic. We're really interested in looking at it from a range of angles, but put simply, social connection is good for our health, and lack of social connection can generally be bad for our health. And social connection definitely has a gendered dimension. There are different ways that men and women connect. And this week, we've got a particular focus on looking at the types of projects that are already out there helping men to build social connection. So we're calling this stream of events our Mateship Best Practice Showcase. And the idea is simply to give the floor to projects that are out in the field, connecting men in lots of different ways. This first session today focuses on projects that help men build deeper connections. We've got two great projects. We've got Mentoring Men, and we've got the Men's Table. They're going to share a bit of their work with us, and we're going to have a bit of time for some Q&A and some chats. I'm sure lots of you in the room have got lots of experience that you want to share and lots of questions you'd like to ask. So really encourage you to do that both throughout the session using the chat box, and also when we actually have the Q&A parts of the conversation. So if Simon's ready and on standby, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Simon Jarvis, the CEO of Mentoring Men. I'll say nothing about them. I'll let him do the talking. I'll just say he's a bloody good bloke, and it was great to hang out with him a little bit last week at the National Suicide Prevention Conference in Canberra. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Ben. That's very nice of you to say. I really appreciate that, and thank you. I'm just going to take you through a little bit of a presentation that I have. So hopefully I can share my screen and share that presentation. And I'm also going to shout out as well. We've got John Ogier on the phone, who's also from Mentoring Men, who I'm probably going to throw under the bus a little bit and maybe ask to comment on some of the things that he does as well. So hopefully you'll get a little bit of an overview of both our program and kind of what our training looks like as well. So just let me know if you can't see this presentation once I've started it up. So
you can see it, but it's not quite in full screen, Simon.
Not quite. Yeah, I'm just getting on that now. Thank you. Okay, so can you see that? Is that all? Is that there?
Absolutely fantastic and on full screen as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, so Mentoring Men, it's an effective tool for improving men's mental health through social connection, like we already talked about, and which is obviously something that's very important to us here. So before I get into it, though, I do want to acknowledge, do an acknowledgement of country. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Mentoring Men does acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land scene community. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that my presentation is being held on the Gurungai and Dora people, and they're the traditional custodians of the land on which we've commenced this workshop on, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. I also want to extend my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So these stats that are up on the board, I'm sure for anyone who's been in this sector or is aware, they're nothing new, but I just wanted to highlight them because I think it's a really important thing to start on, and it's a really important thing to really start to think about what it looks like for men within Australia statistically. So it's the number one cause of death for Australian males between the ages of 14 and 44 in this country. Leading into that, though, is 1 in 8 men will experience depression, and that's what I will highlight are people who have identified or have sought help for depression. I actually think it's higher than that, considering the issues that we have around suicide, and around about 9 suicides a day, in which 7 of them are men. 1 in 5 men will experience anxiety, and around about 45% of men will experience mental health challenges throughout their life. Like I said, I think that the stats are way higher than that, and I think that's an issue that we need to resolve, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. But what I will also say as well is that around about 72% of men in Australia are less likely to access mental health services. So according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, 72% of men will experience a mental health disorder and did not access any treatment for that. So whether that's going to a clinical support or going to the GP to seek support, or are just not actively looking for ways of being able to support their mental health, either through treatment or through therapy or through counselling, professional counselling. And men are 3 times more likely to die of suicide than women, which is considerably high. And actually something I want to point out from the Suicide Prevention Conference as well, because I think that what, for those of you who don't know, Suicide Prevention Australia have just had their national conference for the year. And I was down there talking to lots of different men, including David and Glenn around this. And one of the things that I found quite interesting is that although there was a small amount of discussion and presentations around men and suicide, I want to highlight that I don't think it was enough. I think for the issue that was there, and for the clearly obvious concern that we have around suicide around men in Australia, it wasn't really highlighted or wasn't as prominent as I thought it should be. And I actually want to highlight that as probably one of the reasons why men don't seek support, is because there doesn't seem to be enough recognition around there of that. So following on from that, men in Australia are less likely to access mental health services and have a higher suicide rate than women. But what I want to figure out is, why is it so high? Why are we so challenged in being able to provide that support or being able to seek that support? And I do think there are a number of reasons why this is happening. So the first one is around social expectations and the stigmas around surrounding masculinity. So one of the things that I think we need to be thinking about is, what is the message that we're putting out there around men's mental health, or around men seeking support around mental health services? And I think that there's still a stigma out there, not for everybody, and I wouldn't say that probably everyone on this panel and in this meeting will know this already. But there seems to be this stigma that showing that you need help, showing that you're looking for help, is a sign of having a lack of masculinity, or a lack of a male approach to how we are looking for supports. I think there's an expectation around our society that men are meant to be the stronger of the two sexes, and that we're still meant to hold it together even when things are going tough, and when other people are suffering around us, we still need to hold it together, and we still need to feel and bear that brunt of that stress and that pressure. So I think that's something that we really need to focus on, and something that we need to look at. I also think that there's a lack of understanding around men's mental health issues as well. I think that one of the things that we see is that the language that we use and the commentary that we use around help-seeking behaviours, especially within the health service and the promotion of those health services, is that it's still very female-dominated. And so what we see is a lot of the language is around, is around kind of like sharing, or showing that there's a sign of sensitivity or vulnerability. Using that kind of language is not something that men generally resonate with. And I think that that's one of the problems, is that we're not using the right language to be able to get men to access those services. So have a think about how we can be doing that better in the future. Let's have a think about how we can create an environment where men feel comfortable seeking those supports, because we're using the right language for them. The other thing I want to highlight as well is the limited funding for specific men's health services. So in the research that we've done, and the research that's come out recently, what we've actually seen is that when you look at female-based against male-based support services, health services, there's around about for every 4 women's direct supports, there's only 1 in men. And I think that you also have to highlight and look at where the research is going, where the research is leading, where I suppose from a political perspective, what it's highlighting, and it's mostly around women and children. And so a lot of the funding that's coming out is actually being placed in that area. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely see the need for that support and for those services. But I think there needs to be parity. And I think that we need to find ways of being able to address this issue, because I think that because of the lack of help-seeking behavior from men, the research is not always showing that we need those supports as much as children and women. But that's part of the problem. And I think that leads into the first 2 things that I talked about, the lack of understanding around mental health and the communication issues that we're having around that, and also the social expectations. So I think that, by the time that we are looking to find support, especially in men, so when we're looking at crisis management, when we're looking at, suicide prevention, it's always around the pointy end of things. And generally for men, that's way too late. So I think we need to be looking at this from a very different perspective. And I think we need to look at this from a more early intervention, a more proactive community-based approach. So who are Mentoring Men? So we're a registered charity within Australia, and we are dedicated to improving the mental health and well-being of men through our free life one-on-one mentoring. So we're not here as a crisis management service. We're not here to support men that are, ideation of suicide. What we're here to do is to create an environment where men feel safe to be able to open up, to be able to share their experiences, but also to be validated in what's going through. I think the isolation that men feel from those services is because they don't think that many other people are going through what they go through. And when you think about when men go to the pub, or when they go for a drink, or when they, go out with their mates, it never really comes up. Whenever people say, like, how you doing? We just go, yeah, we're all right. We're doing okay. And we don't really talk and open up about what actually is going on. And that's kind of what our mentoring program actually helps and supports on. So how that works is that we are made up of mentees and mentors. So how I speak about this is that a mentee is a man who seeks to improve their life with support from a mentor. And a mentor is a man who volunteers his time to meet, listen, and help a mentee through his life journey. How I kind of like to explain it is that it's a man who needs a little bit of help from a man who can give a little bit of help. And I think that's a really straightforward way of looking at this. So all our male mentors are volunteer-based, although they do go through a rigorous training and interview process. So we almost treat them like they're unpaid employees. So they have to go through an interview with us. We do a criminal reference check, a personal reference check. They go through our training, and only at that point we've done all those and checked that everything matches and that they show the same values what Mentoring Men show. Are they able to then be a mentor? So, like I said, our mentors attend a mentor training and an optional additional suicide prevention training, and they're screened by a national criminal check, and they provide their references. So each mentoring relationship runs for a minimum of 6 to 12 months. However, we don't have an end date to this. So one of the key differences between us and many other services is that we don't put an end date on how long you need us for. So if you're going through your life and you feel like you need a mentor and you reach out to us, and during that time things start to improve and you go, look, I don't think I need a mentor anymore, or I want to be, or I don't think I need to have someone to talk to, we're always going to be there for you regardless. So how we want to create Mentoring Men and what we're looking to do is really twofold. The mentoring itself is a byproduct of our educational piece around, I suppose, 2 things: help-seeking behavior. So 1, helping people and educating men that it's okay to reach out, that it's okay to find someone to talk to. And 2, creating mentoring as part of your lifestyle. So like I said before, having someone that you can talk to should be like you go to the gym, or like you do meditation, or anything else that you do to keep your health and well-being up. Having someone to talk to, even through the good times, is just as important as any other health activity that you do, because if you have someone there going through the good times, when things do go wrong and kind of shit starts to hit the fan, you've got someone there that can talk to you, you've got someone there that can help you. So we do ask for a minimum of 6 to 12 months. However, through Mentoring Men, we've actually had relationships that have lasted much longer than that. And we've actually had people that become mentors themselves after being a mentee because they feel like they can give back at that point in time. Or we've also had mentors who have come back to us and said, actually, I'm going through a really rough time at the moment and I feel like I could have someone to talk to. So we know that life's not linear, right? It goes ups and downs, there's peaks and troughs. So as long as you're there and as long as you need someone, we're going to be there for you. I might just ask John to jump in and just share a little bit more about the mentor training and what we actually go through in that program.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Hi, everybody. So in our mentor training program, we have a hybrid approach, which is to do some e-learning, first of all, before we get together as a group. So that's individual e-learning, which is a little bit of background, a little bit of history, getting people to think about and reflect on what mentoring is and what it isn't. And also then to just get a bit of a head start on some of those key communication skills that we need our mentors to practice. And before then, so that's done before they get together in a small group online session. Typically, we also do face-to-face where it's practical, but most of our training is online because we're a national team, and that means we can cover the country easily. And during that online program, then that allows the group to form and come together and feel relaxed and comfortable to tell a little bit about their own, story about what's brought them to Mentoring Men, but also then as we go through the learning and the content, which is, I said, around communication skills and so on. But it's also very important for the guys to be able to learn from each other and bring some of their lived experience to one another in some of the challenges that they might have faced, in their lives. And all of that is great value then to the group as a whole. And we do a lot of role plays so that our volunteer mentors put themselves in the shoes of being a volunteer mentor, but also being a mentee as well, because we all, as Simon has already said, we all need a little bit of help from time to time, and we could all use a mentor regardless of our situation. So it's a really practical day that we have together, it's called a foundation course because it enables our volunteer mentors to be able to be mentor ready for their first mentee. And then we will add additional content and additional resources, because sometimes you really only appreciate the depth of some of the skills that you might need after you have started mentoring. So there's additional programs and additional content that we introduce as we go through the relationship that we have with our community. That's for the mentors. We also have a relatively new program for mentees as well, because we want them, after their intake interview, we want them to be able to understand a little bit more about what is expected of them as a mentee. It is a two-way street. It's all about it's about self-guidance, as you can see on the screen there. Our mentors are not there to provide the answers. They are there to provide the support and the conversation to help the mentee to find his own answers. And that is really the beauty of this informal mentoring, life mentoring that we have, where, it is informal, and, Glenn mentioned mateship, and that's really often what happens as a result of ongoing regular meetings with each other. That mateship does develop into something that is really trusting, so that it really helps both parties. The mentee is helped with his challenges, but the mentor ends up finding a lot out about himself and learning from his mentee as well.
Thanks, John. Thank you. I appreciate that. So where do we get our mentors from? And a lot of the time it is from lived experience. So, our volunteer mentors come from a really varied background and come from lots of different environments. We know that Australia is such a melting pot of communities and a melting pot of environments. So we have men who have come from a lived experience environment. Our volunteer mentors are 21 years and over. And what we really help them is teach them how to listen, how to help set goals, and know how to refer as well. I think that's really important. One of the things that we know about around mentoring men or around men is that they're not very good at, one, navigating the health system or navigating services that are available to them. And so we know as volunteer mentors that there's only so much we can do. We're not a clinical service, so where we can, we do refer on. So our mentors and mentees are carefully matched together. So we do all our matching manually based on a lot of different factors such as age, location, life experiences, what they want to focus on, what they want to help on, and from a mentee perspective, what their goals and what their targets are. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background of one of our current mentors who's actually gone on to become not just a volunteer mentor with us, but actually is now a trainer with us as well. So he supports Indigenous men across the country with our Aboriginal mentoring program. So Neil comes from the southwestern Sydney area. He is currently teaching at TAFE and has also been a community development officer, and he's also a counsellor as well. So he helps us out in lots of different ways. So he's been out and done fundraising for us. He's gone out and spoken to community environments for us. He's gone out and kind of now training up our mentors in our mentor training. So he's just a typical guy. He doesn't have a specific set of skills in a certain area, but he's very passionate about mentoring men. He's very passionate about supporting men in this community, and that's really what we're looking for. So at the moment, we have around about 700 men engaged across the program in Australia. Now, predominantly, we are in New South Wales, but we do have men across the country. So in most states and territories, we do have men who are providing support. And they do that either through face-to-face mentoring, or if that's not possible, then they also do through video conferencing, telephone, email, whatever works. Because we know that men, we all have busy lives, we all have things going on. So one of the things about mentoring men is that we try and keep it as easy and as flexible as possible to be able to support men in their life through how it works for them based on their kind of lifestyle, what's going on in their family, what's going on in other environments. So we try and keep it as easy as possible. We give you the structure and we give you the tools to be able to mentor and to be a mentee. But apart from that, it's really up to you and your mentor about how that works, what that looks like. And I think that that's one of the key factors for why we have been so successful. So I'll give you an example. This is not Aaron, and we changed his name because he, was someone who kind of came through our program, but he wanted to keep his privacy. So Aaron was only 19 when his son was born. And he was a little bit overwhelmed and was close to leaving his wife and family. But he reached out to Mentoring Men and he said to us, look, I'm really struggling with this. I'm not really sure what to do. I'm not really sure where to go. And I just need someone to talk to about what fatherhood looks like for me. And so we kind of reached out, set him up with a guy who's kind of been through that, got experience with family life, got experience with, what it's like to have new children, and we set him up, and now he feels so much better about fatherhood. He actually loves the fact that he gets to engage with his kids. He loves the fact that, by being able to just have a validated conversation around what it feels like to be, in that environment, he's got the most out of that. And to be fair, that's, I want to share with you as well. This is an experience that I had. So just quickly, I'll tell you a story about me, and this is a very similar situation. So I was having my first child, and I was sat in the obstetrician's clinic with my partner, and rightly so, the conversation's on her, right? So it's talking about what her body looks, or what her body changes are going to go through, the approach, and the mental health issues that she might have going through pregnancy. And I remember them standing, sitting and talking, and then looking over at me, because I'm sat in the corner kind of very quietly, and I'm kind of, ghostly white, and I'm starting to sweat, and I'm starting to feel a little bit panicky. And in my head, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do here. Like, I can barely look after myself. How the fuck am I going to look after another little one? And it wasn't until my father-in-law sat me down and was like, look, mate, this is what's going to happen. Everyone goes through this. Everyone experiences this. And it's okay. Did I start to come out the other end and feel like I've got something to give to my family? Because at that point in time, I really felt like I didn't have anything. And it wasn't until I actually had someone validate what I was going through, validate the experiences that I was feeling, that it really started to turn the corner for me. And so that's why I'm so passionate about mentoring men, because that's all it is just having someone who's probably gone through something like you have, sitting down with you and just feeling, that it's going to be okay. So this is just a couple.
Simon.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in. I didn't want to crash your personal story there, and thanks for sharing it. You've gone quite a bit over time.
I apologize. Sorry.
It's okay. Lots to share. So if you could just take 30 seconds to wrap up, and then we'll make sure David's got plenty of time too. Yeah,
no problem. So I was nearly there anyway. So just to get involved with mentoring men, we have our mentor peer support groups. We have our cultural linguistics. We've got cultural linguistically and diverse community work groups, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and we have monthly mentor training workshops and suicide prevention workshops. So if you want to be involved, reach out to me afterwards. We're really keen to hear from you, and I'll leave it there. But thank you so much, and I apologise for going over. I could probably talk about this for another hour.
Fabulous. Thanks, Simon, and thanks, John, for your contribution to. Great to get an insight into how the system, the whole mentoring men approach works. I encourage you. We're gonna have a few questions there, but we're out of time for now. So I encourage you to drop any questions you have of Simon or John into the chat box and ask them to pick it up there. But I want to make sure that David's also got a good chunk of time to share about the important work of the men's table. And Simon, if you stick around to the end, we'll maybe have a bit of extra time to pick up some Q&As right at the very end. So there's mentoring men, men connecting on a one-to-one basis. And now to the men's table. Again, I won't do much of an introduction. I'll let David speak for himself. Another bloody good bloke, and great to hang out with him at the Suicide Prevention Conference last week. But over to David to talk about the men's table.
Thanks very much, Glenn. G'day, everyone. Welcome, and hope you all had good weekends and finding your way into the week. We got a beautiful sunny morning here in Sydney, where I am. Speaking of which, I just wanted to firstly do an acknowledgement of country and acknowledge and pay respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, on all of the lands that we meet. I'm on Gadigal country of the Eora Nation, that's Sydney, and acknowledgement of country at the men's table for us is really important, because we know that the Indigenous peoples throughout time really valued connection in a very deep way. It was core to their culture. Valuing connection, love and respect with self, with others, and with country. So we feel like that's so central to mental health, to being a healthy human, and certainly being part of the men's table. Today's presentation is entitled, Go Beyond Banter. And I wanted to talk a bit about how the kind of conversations we have and the places that we belong, where we have conversations, can really serve us in getting more connected and having a different kind of way of relating as mates, so that we can have more than mateship, or a different kind of mateship. I wanted to ask for your input straight up front. So whether it's on chat, or whether you turn off your unmute, or so you unmute yourself and have a quick say. So the traditional man, broad sweeping generalization here, but maybe we can picture him, someone who's fairly stoic, who's used to trying to sort things out himself, who feels that he can't show much weakness, and so forth. Now, the strengths and limitations of this kind of way of being. So it's not like, you know, we're saying this is bad, but there may be some limitations in what mateship looks like when you're carrying that more traditional version of masculinity. So I just wanted to ask for your input. What would be some implications of mateship if this is the way you see being a bloke? And as I said, you can call something out or you can type something in.
I'll jump in.
If you are
before-
speaking, yeah, great. If you are speaking, make sure you're unmuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's the whole thing that we do see in the world right now, where it's all that self-reliance, and we want to do things ourselves before we reach out. And it's not until we've hit our head against the wall a number of times and discovered that, hang on, we don't have the answers, that we consider to get help. And yeah, it's a definition that needs to be changed.
Yeah. Self-reliance. It's a very common one. And sorry, I missed, was that Robin who spoke? No?
Sorry, mate, that Tynan, roses in the ocean.
Tynan, thanks, Tynan. Yeah, appreciate it. Did someone else want to have a turn? What does mateship look like when we're carrying this sort of traditional version of masculinity? Well, I'll fill in the blanks here. Banter. I mean, you know, we all are involved with various relational groups and social configurations. I'm part of a golfing group of buddies, and it's mostly banter. We've been together 25 years, but do I know what's really going on for somebody in their life and at home? Not much. You know, I get the basics, the sort of the thumbnail version sketch of how life is, but I actually don't really hear what's in the man's heart. So banter is another way of us sort of maintaining a more superficial level of communication and connection. So we reckon it's there's an opportunity to free ourselves from these sort of more outdated norms about being a man and adopt healthier versions of masculinity. And there is definitely changes happening in the zeitgeist. There's definitely things happening in Australian culture. There's more messages around, hey, you know, it's okay to say how you really are. It's okay to put your hand up for help. And we're getting that from, you know, sporting figures, from political leaders, you know, from all kinds of places. These messages are starting to come through. And Men's Table has kind of put their head up above the parapet just at a time where this seems to be, you know, what more men are starting to acknowledge and look for. So at the Men's Table, we say we don't just talk about footy and shit. And this came from one of our very early entrees. And an entree, I'll talk about it at the end, is where men can come to find out about the Men's Table. It's a no obligation experience, 90 minutes on Zoom or 2 hours in person. And it was about our third entree ever back in 2019. And one of the guys said, look, I've got mates, but we just talk about footy and shit. So again, he was referencing this dynamic and this pattern of having a lot of banter, but not a lot of real authentic sharing. And so the Men's Table was born out of that need for a different sort of conversation. So a Men's Table is about a dozen men, give or take. It's we're not fixed on a dozen, but it's about that size. And each table meets once a month over dinner in a private room of a public place. So a pub or the back room of a restaurant. And the invitation to be part of a Men's Table is to share the highs and lows of each of the men's lives and how they're really feeling. It becomes a safe and a trusted place. The relationships build because it's the same men who meet a month after month and year after year. And I'm lucky enough to have been one of the members of the original Men's Table. And we started meeting back in 2011. And so we're coming up to 12 years. And, you know, I can tell you when you spend that long with people and the conversation is about what's really going on for each of us, the relationships become very strong and very connected. I notice one of the men from a table is on the call today, Mungo. At some point in a little while, Mungo, if you're willing, I might just ask you to share a couple of comments on your experience of being at a table and yeah, how it's impacted you. So how did this Beyond Banter thing arise? Well, when we first started our first Men's Table, Ben Hughes, my fellow co-founder, who was actually due to be here today, but has COVID. So he's laying up in bed and sends his apologies. Ben was chatting with a couple of other guys. We were all part of, at that point, a business networking group. There was male, female. Ben was chatting over coffee with a couple of other guys, and he was going through a tough time. And Ben's someone who's really willing to put his heart on his sleeve and actually be open. And he was doing that. And when he finished, the other two guys turned around and they took a turn and started talking for real. And I don't know if any of you guys have been in business networking environments, but everyone's kind of got their best face on, looking like they've all got it together. And so this conversation that was ensuing was a very different sort of conversation. It was actually about what people were really feeling. And what Ben realized in that moment is, because he's willing to be open, it's like he was opening a door and other men could step through and be willing to be vulnerable as well. And so that's the basis of the men's table, is it is this place where men are invited to share the highs and lows and feelings. And of course, men don't have to share. They can just listen as well. It's one of the guidelines. And so that's the other thing about how the table works, is it's set up upon a set of guidelines that we'll learn from the first table. And there are things like, you don't have to share, you can just listen. But it also talks about sharing from the heart. And a really important one is no fixing. So a man puts his heart on his sleeve, he's going through something, and rather than all the blokes around the table jumping in and offering him solutions, the idea is just absorb and be present and compassionate to what the man's going through. But unless he asks for advice, just learning to listen and give him the time and the place to be able to open up and connect with his own feelings is an incredible, valuable thing, and allows him to go further in many cases, rather than being distracted by questions or having to think about the solutions being offered to him. I'm going to show a video here, so hopefully this will work, of a few men talking about the impact of the men's table on them. And then Mungo, if you're willing, you might like to say something after this. Just somebody could let me know if the sound is okay.
What
Good.
keeps drawing me back to the men's table is not just 9 new friends, which I feel very close to. It's that I recognize that all these guys take responsibility for their lives.
Over the last couple of years, I've gone through some really rough times, and to know that I've got a group of people every month that I can basically just lay my soul on the table, it's just fantastic.
The fact that it's regimented every month that we do this, it just sort of meant that there was finally something in my life that I could just rely on.
Even if you don't have anything to share, your presence over there makes others feel comfortable.
I think about the men's table quite a lot when something happens in my life. I think if it was men's table tonight, I'd definitely talk about that. To do business with these people, and I think it's definitely deepened those relationships.
It's never boring, but one thing it is month in, month out, is safe. And that often comes up in our meetings. It's a safe place for you to just share and unburden yourself.
Mungo, did you want to have a quick word on how you're finding your experience at the men's table?
Yeah, for sure. I think I would have joined probably about 2 years ago during COVID. And I think like a lot of men, I mean, I'm 52 now, I probably would have been about 49, 50 at that time. And like a lot of men, I guess I was feeling a lot more disconnected from friends. All my social stuff tended to be either mediated through my wife, or I had a social job. I have a social job, sales and meetings and all that sort of stuff. But I found when COVID happened, I was really struck by the fact that I just didn't have any close male friends, or I had 1 or 2, but they were spread all around the place. And I really missed that. And I really, had a few issues as a result. Yeah, probably hear the emotion. And a counsellor suggested I go to the men's table, and it worked out fantastically. It started off a bit slow because we were all a bit sort of reluctant to share, but as time went on and we got to trust each other, the group grew, it's just become an extraordinary resource for me. And I know that's the case for many other members of the table. So that's my experience.
Thank you. And thanks for being such a wonderful contributor to your table too, Mungo. A bit like what Simon was saying about mentoring men. Men's table definitely is a reciprocity. It's giving and taking. Men get heard and have the opportunity to unburden. That's how they get served. But they also are there showing up for the others and listening and giving compassion to the other men. And that's how they serve others. So all the men at the table are playing both those roles. This slide's just got a few impacts from our annual evaluations of men at tables. We've just finished our latest survey. We haven't yet gathered the data together. We had 570 men from tables this year respond to our annual impact survey, asking about impacts on them. This data here you're looking at is from a couple of other years. Middle on the left, 76% of men said they feel a sense of community belonging. So there's a strong sense that you become part of something, and that the friendships and the connection really are enriching to men's lives. You heard on the video, but also at the bottom left, it's a safe place to share feelings and be vulnerable. Up on the top left, 81% of men last year, when we asked them, said there was a positive ripple effect to relationships beyond their table. So not only are they getting the benefits at the table, but they're taking them home as well. So there was, I think, almost 70% of them were getting benefits in their relationship with an intimate partner. Families, 63%, and other men, 58%. And we've asked more this year about their relationships with other men, both at the table and beyond. And we'll have more of that data to turn out shortly. And then just the help seeking was one we asked about in 2021, where we asked men about their help seeking tendencies before being at a table, which is on the right-hand side, on the bottom right, and then after being at a table, which is the same graph, but on the middle there. So just having a look at a couple of these, the tendency before being at a table, if they felt stuck or troubled, like 48% said they would bottle it up. After being at a table, only 8% would do that. 31% of men said they would feel shame about being vulnerable. Only 4% after being at a table. And 24% said they would use a substance to cope, and that reduced to 9% after being at a table. And if we have a look on the contrary, some more useful approaches to help seeking in the middle there, the tendency to reach out to somebody increased to 74% after being at a table. And the willingness to try and share what's really going on, up to 89%. This is a massive jump from previously 29%. Interestingly, the second set of bars on the left there down the middle, seeking professional support virtually didn't change before being at a table and after being at a table. So that was quite fascinating to us. Suggests that there is certain men that are willing to see a therapist, but potentially many that don't want to. Just about to finish here. Men's Table is a growing network around the country. We've got tables in all places apart from Northern Territory, and our plan is to have one up there this year as well. Tynan, yes, those reports are available for us to share with you, but also on the website. You can download our evaluations off our website. And sorry, Graham, I hadn't seen you there too from MT20. Thanks for joining as well. And you're saying best benefits has been really to listen to others. Yeah, absolutely. There's now 125 tables around the country, and that's growing quite rapidly. And there's about 1,300 men sitting at tables. In fact, over 1,300 men sitting at tables currently. And finally, if anyone on this call or anyone you know might be interested in finding out more about the Men's Table, then the first step is always to come to an entree. Every man who's at a table has been to an entree. We run them either fortnightly on Zoom, and that's an easy and accessible way to still have a very positive experience. The connection and the willingness for men to be open on those calls is still quite profound. And we also share about how the men's table works, you know, the guidelines. And then we do them in various locations. So we've got entrees coming up throughout May. We've got over 20 entrees, some out Western New South Wales coming up this week, in rural Victoria, in WA, and up in the northern part of New South Wales as well. So it's a case of having a look on the website to see where the entrees are in person. And if there's not one in person, then jumping into the Zoom one is the best bet. And as I indicated before, there's plenty of information on the website, themenstable.org. You can download those evaluation reports as well for people who do like to find out a bit more about something. And we're about to produce a 4th evaluation report, particularly on the ripple effect of those relationship impacts beyond the table, you know, the impacts on women and partners and on families of men who are sitting at tables. And as Graham has shared, a lot of it is about learning to listen more, learning to be more emotionally connected, learning to be able to express what's really going on. And so for us, that's an opportunity to have a different kind of mateship and go beyond banter, beyond that traditional way of showing up as a man. And also just wanted to recognize what you said, John, in your chat earlier, that, you know, the man box view isn't wrong, as you say. There's some wonderful traits about, you know, the traditional ideas of masculinity. And this is really just extending and allowing men to bring their muscles and their tears, you know, have their heads and their hearts involved in what they're doing. So showing up more fully in their full humanity. That's enough for now. Thanks very much for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Great presentation, David. Thanks so much for that. Good to get a glimpse inside what's happening at the men's table. I'm going to pose a question first before we go back to the room that will hopefully bring both you and Simon together and create a little bit of an overlap too. So the question is about the strengths and potentially weaknesses of the one-to-one approach versus the group approach. And so the question is, you know, what do you see the value is of the group approach or the one-to-one approach? But also, how does your particular approach also bleed out into the other, in a sense? So how does the one-to-one approach help create a wider group connection, and how does group connection help build one-to-one relationships? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
David, as you're in the hot seat, if you'd pick that up first, and then I'll jump back to Simon.
Yeah, sure. I think more and more as we go on, yes, we have the men's table has a positive mental health benefit to men, but more importantly, it has a community building impact. You know, men genuinely feel a part of something bigger than themselves, and there's that sense of community, and that's very much a part of being a group, because there is diverse characters. You know, not everyone at a table men will naturally have affinity and chemistry with. But you learn to still listen and connect with a man who's, in some cases, very different to you. So that's a part of the community building. How does it flow on? I mean, men in a healthy functioning group will end up in one-to-one conversations throughout the course of time with other men at their table. So it allows for the opportunity for men to find those one-to-one connections as well. It's not part of the program. They don't have to do one-to-one connection, but it naturally arises. So as a simple example, I'm part of 2 tables. The newer table I'm part of, 2.5 years in, I'm just organising a first one-to-one catch-up with one of the guys on a text this morning. And we've had wonderful connection at our table, but we've never actually spent time outside the table yet. So there's that opportunity. Yeah.
Great, thanks, David. Great answer. And Simon, the strength of one-to-one and how that also connects into building community as well, potentially.
Yeah, look, I actually think they're very complementary for each other, and I think that the strengths that underlie and underpin both are fairly similar. I suppose one of the ways that the one-on-one goes about it slightly different from our perspective is that in terms of the relationship, that's a little bit more formal. So we're allowing ourselves to have this opportunity to talk one-on-one with someone when maybe at the start it's not always comfortable to talk within a group environment. And I think that's one of the parts of the program that works well for us. But I also see, very similar to what David said, is actually when we do our peer support groups, when we get together, because there is that linkage in why everyone's there, why everyone's attending or being part of Mentoring Men, you have that affinity. So I think that where we can, support each other and collaborate, and I think that there's value in both. I think that's where the greatest opportunity for us as a group of services or a group of organizations to get together and work in a way that supports men holistically across the country, I think is what's really important. So for me, I think that the sense of purpose, the sense of connection that they get being a mentor, but then also being able to connect from a community perspective and allowing yourself to be able to share not only what's going on within your own life, but also learn how to generate new skills, generate new environments where you're able to talk to other men around the concerns that you're having is so important. And, again, I think that although it's formal in terms of the relationship, the casualness and the openness of how we communicate, where we communicate, what that looks like is again a real strength. And I think that relaying back to what David was saying in terms of that, sense of community, that's something that we really need to get back to within men. And one of the things that came up at the health forum was actually, where do men talk now? Where do men actually get together and chat? And I think both environments, David and ours, provide you with those opportunities to do that in safe spaces.
Great, fabulous, and fantastic that you both managed to handle that tricky question without going into a competition with each other. Beautiful beautiful modelling of collaboration in the men's space. Thank you both. So now, if you've got a question from the floor, you can either pop it in the chat box or you can use the toolbar here to raise a hand. Bill, I've seen your real hand. You can also raise a virtual hand using the reactions button. That's the smiley face. If you click on that, you'll see there's a sign saying raise hand. And while you're working your way around that, I will just do a quick advert for the rest of today's events. So at 12:30, I'm going to be talking us through AMHF's How to Help a Mate Doing It Tough guide. If you've not seen that yet, I encourage you to come along. That'll take about 30-45 minutes. Great little event to have just before lunch. Then after lunch at 2 p.m. today, we have a session on social drinking and male friendship. If these guys are taking us beyond beer and banter, well, we've got a couple of guys explaining how beer can be a great connecting point for men in a really healthy way. That's Shay from the Tough Guy Book Club and Daniel Chin from the Barstool Brothers. Last session of the day at 5 o'clock. Really looking forward to this. It's a couple of organizations outside of men's health, which we really want to learn from in terms of how we build social connection at a community level. That's Relationships Australia presenting about their Neighbours Everyday campaign, and 1,000 Play Streets presenting about their Play Streets initiative. Both really interesting projects. I'd love you to come along to that at 3:30 if you can. And after our short coffee break at 11:15 a.m., we have Penrith Walk and Talk, one of the biggest men's walks in Australia. We have Wayne from Inner Man Adventures, and we have Lance from Solid Men in a session all about how action helps men build social connection. And as if I planned it, I'm going to come to a bloke who's helping men connect through social action, which I know is Martin Turner, who runs a group. You tell us a little bit about your group first, Martin, briefly, but then ask your question, please.
Well, thanks, Glenn. Yes, I'm part of a group in Berwick, Melbourne, called Fitness for Blokes, and we've been going for over 10 and a half years. It's a totally voluntary group. We work out, well, we offer sessions 3 times a week. We run a workout, and then there's the obligatory catch-up time immediately after that in the form of coffee and a lot of banter as well. And that leads me into my question, David. Is it possible to establish a men's table within an existing group such as ours, just to try and move from beyond banter to the deeper stuff, rather than joining a new group, just establishing it within our current group?
Yeah, it is to some extent, Martin. The one big challenge is how established and strong is the existing culture to move the needle. If you, let's say, are wanting to have the guys move from a more superficial way of relating to, you know, adhering to the guidelines of the fundamentals and learning to have that more open relationship, it depends on how sort of solidified in a way that culture is. So, for example, I wouldn't be able to get my golfing buddies to just sit around and have a men's table because we've had 25 years of relating in a different way. So often in a situation like this, one or two men might say, I'd like to be part of a table and start something locally, but also invite other men in, rather than saying, hey, why don't we get all of the guys who meet in this way to meet in a different format? It's possible, but there will be that cultural change that you're really trying to put into the current group. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. I'll follow up further outside the context of the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks,
Great,
Martin.
thanks.
I know Tynan's dropped a couple of questions into the chat box. Tynan, I wondered if you wanted to actually ask yourself the most burning question you have.
Sure. I'm super impressed by both programs and the engagement that you've had. It also sounds inspiring. What's been the success for engaging with men and taking men from like the men's groups that I've been involved in? When men connect, they love it and they find it so valuable, but they don't prioritize themselves enough to keep coming back. So what's worked for you?
I'll go first. Simon might have an answer too. Tynan, I think it's a really, really central question to all men's work is we want more men doing this stuff, right? Just plain language. That's why we use things like go beyond banter. We don't just talk about footy and shit, because a lot of men are not out there going, oh, I need to do something about my mental health. That's not the language they're thinking and using. They're just going, I need to probably have a place to have a real conversation, or I need to have some blokes around me who are really willing to listen. So, you know, often portraying stuff with a mental health lens is actually not going to resonate because that's not what they're necessarily thinking. Even though maybe they're struggling with their mental health, what they're really struggling with is a place to belong, a place to, you know, to connect, a place to have a real conversation, that sort of thing. So I think the language we use to invite men into things is central. And we've been very conscious about that all the way through.
Very similar to David. I think the language that we use is really important, but I also think it's the value that they get from there. So for us, especially with the mentors coming in, we always think about it as like, what do you get as a mentee? Well, you get someone that you can talk to, you get someone that validates that. But from a mentor perspective, what we also found is that there is a reduction in feelings of isolation. There's a reduction of kind of how you feel, you know, as displaced within your community, and all of a sudden you get a sense of value, you get a sense of purpose, you get something that you might not have had before in a way that allows you to manage what that looks like. So it's not putting too much structure in place around how and often you have to meet, where you have to meet, what that looks like. So for me, it's that sense of giving something back where there's not so much sense of onerous around that as well. And I think that that's what's really important is allowing spaces for men to be flexible on their time and what that looks like for us.
Great. Thank you. Great answer, Simon. And speaking of time, we've hit time, but if David and Simon, you have 5 minutes, we'll take another couple of questions. But if you've got a hard exit, just let me know.
I'm all good.
All good.
Bill, I know you had your hand up earlier. Do you want to jump in and ask a question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Can I congratulate David on his men's table, because it's almost exactly what our group does. Our group is the old men, new ideas. We concentrate on the older men, and we don't have a meal. We have about 25 groups running around Melbourne. And Omni, as it's called, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's run under COTA, which is the Council of the Aged. And we do almost exactly the same thing. We meet fortnightly, we chat, do all the things about respect and privacy and everything that you were talking about before with exactly the same aims. So my question is, well, perhaps the biggest difference I noticed is if you're a little bit short of funds, it doesn't cost anything because we don't feed you, but that's a different story. But anyway, we've been around since 2004, 25 groups, and we're looking to expand. And my question is to David, we should get together and have a chat because we're doing almost exactly the same thing, not in competition with each other. Some people would want to have the meals, other people would say, no, I don't want, I want to do something a bit different. I'd love to be hooked up with you, Simon, and talk about what Omni does and what your group does, and perhaps we could do some more together.
Great, thanks, Bill. I'll make sure that you get those connections. We've certainly had Omni groups on Men's Health Connect before, so we're well aware of you. But I think as a larger movement, it's great to have a different representatives from different groups involved. So thanks for being here, David. Anything you want to just respond to on that as well?
No, I've just put my email in the chat group, so just hit me up and happy to have a chat. Yeah, let's get more men involved in being part of a community where they have that belonging and connection and an opportunity to share from their heart and also support other men.
Great. And look, okay, thank you, David. One final question for me to the group. I'm really interested to hear if anyone online who's been involved in men's gatherings or men's circles for 20, 30, 40 years before groups like Mentoring Men and Men's Table emerged, has anything they want to share from the perspective of how men's circles works and what they're seeing in these models. I could name people, but if anyone wants to jump in, you're very welcome. Brendan,
a lot of wisdom there. A lot of wisdom in that silence there, Glenn.
Anything you want to share? Got it. Can't because we're in the background. Tony Webb would normally jump in at this point as well. Who's been around men's circles for years, but I noticed his camera's off. Okay, I won't push it. Oh no, there's Tony. Tony, our circle elder. I'd love you to give us your reflections to wrap us up. If you can, if you're able to come off mute, Tony.
Okay. Look, I think the things today were very useful. We've had some experience within the Health and Men's Shed of encouraging the guys who came through what we call the inner workshop. So you get all the usual stuff in men's sheds, but we've actually created this space where we do this kind of stuff. We've been encouraging the guys particularly to look at reaching out into other groups. We've had some pretty negative stuff back from guys who were involved in the men's table, which I think we might raise at another time. But the guy felt, okay, I engaged with the table, but then when he reached out to make personal contact with the guys that he'd met at the table, he got zip response. So I think there's there's an issue there somewhere that whether these actually do create the kind of relationship that men are looking for. But that's just me being slightly critical based on the evidence. The other area we've been trying to get is to get the men in the sheds to look at their role as a mentoring one. And we've certainly been able to do that within our own networks. But reaching out to younger men has actually proved quite difficult from some of the sheds. So there are a few issues here that we're actually sort of struggling with. So I'm glad to hear all the good news. I'm just conscious that there are a few barriers in the way to moving this thing forward in the way we'd like to. But these are issues that we're working on.
Right, Tony. David, I'll give you an opportunity to respond just in a moment. Is only fair. What I just want to observe as we move to wrap up is one of the new thoughts that's just emerged for me in this conversation is, and it's shown up in some of the questions and comments, is how do we balance that old school shoulder to shoulder approach like men's sheds with the heart-to-heart approach of initiatives like we've spoken today? Do they both have a role separate? Can they support each other and inform each other? I think that presents a really interesting question and challenge for us in the men's health space that we should continue to wrestle for, and ideally find ways to make them complement each other. But David, let me allow you just to respond to Tony's critique as well.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, and thanks, Tony, for the feedback. We do speak with men who depart a table. It's not for every man. To find out, what's going on. So it's a really useful feedback loop when it doesn't work out for somebody. I've put a note in the chat. Occasionally a man who comes to a table sort of really is yearning for that social connection straight away and starts to hit up the other guys. Hey, let's catch up for a coffee and so on. But some guys are busy. Some guys have already got, their social life, and they're actually looking to the table for something else. And we say to all of them at the Entree and beyond, it takes time for the social relationships to build and for that culture to take hold where social connection does happen outside the table. Mungo's table is a case in point. They've got a very active social life now, but for the first 12 to 18 months of that table, there was a lot less stuff going on outside the table and for social connection. So I'm thinking that your man who gave you the feedback may well have been at the table for maybe less amount of time to let that trust and the culture build before he wanted that social connection. And I understand, therefore, that he might have been rebutted or the guys may not have been ready to engage in that way. But I'm sorry to hear his feedback, and I'm very happy to chat with him or you directly.
Thanks, David and Tony. We'll leave it there, but please continue the conversations offline. For those of you who have a couple of minutes, please click on the link I've just shared in the chat box and provide us feedback on today's session. It really helps, and you're much more likely to do it now. If you do it now, then leave it to do later. A massive thank you to David and to Simon, but also to John and Mungo for coming and sharing their experience of those two services. I've really enjoyed this session. We have just 8 minutes now before the next session, which is on how action builds social connection in men. But for now, thank you, and I hope to see many of you in about 8 minutes' time. Take care.